What's up, everybody? Welcome. This is Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, episode 844. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Professor Gino Traballano. We're going to talk about all kinds of great stuff in just a moment. But for those of you out there who might be new, a couple things that you might want to keep in mind. Go to whistlekick.com and see all the things that we're doing, because it's a lot more than this show. And if you use the code podcast15, you can save 15% on any of the things that we offer over there. Whistlekickmartialartsradio.com is the place to go for this show, for every episode we've ever done. Transcripts, links, anything that Gino and I talk about today, we're going to have linked up in the show notes over there. Easiest place to find that stuff. And if you love what we do, if you want to support us in our mission to connect, educate, and entertain the traditional martial artists of the world, please consider joining our Patreon, our family Patreon, patreon.com/whistlekick. Starts at just a couple bucks a month and goes up from there. Great stuff that you can do to support us as we support all of you in the traditional martial arts world. But without further ado, hey Gino, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course. I was trying to remember how long I've known you, and I don't remember how long I've known you. It's 2015, 2016, somewhere
Something
in there.
like that, yeah. That's when we started connecting through the symposium environment, and sounds about right.
Yeah. Symposium, of course, put on by Terry Dow, who's been on the show, and a good friend to both of us, wonderful supporter, and probably the person I know that speaks most highly of you. I mean, every time he talks about you, he's talking about how you guys are sparring, and you're taking it to him, which I know.
Came enough, yeah. He's a good supporter. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and let's start here, because your primary art, which I see is the way people look at martial arts, whatever your main thing is. I don't know a lot about it, and I don't know a lot about how you ended up training Savate. So maybe we start there.
Absolutely. So, yes, my primary art is Savate, and it's funny because the last probably 15, 20 years, people associate me almost solely to that. But my background covers, like you and many other martial artists, covers more styles and proficient in other styles. But absolutely, Savate is where I come from and where I shine. I started, actually, I was preparing for the chat, and I was jogging my memory. I started in 1986, and I started doing full contact at the time.
You just started doing full contact.
Yeah, I was 14, and I wanted to do martial arts. So the funny story is that I wanted to do martial arts, but my parents never wanted me to do karate or something that was, in their view, too hard. So full contact at the time was coming out in Italy, and my parents didn't speak English. So I told them, hey, I want to do this sport. And my parents just like, yeah, okay, we'll pay the gym membership. And I went to this small karate gym nearby my area where I grew up in Rome, in Cinecittà, where I started training there, doing full contact, no Savate. And it was very old school, very small gym. The classes always ended with the new students sparring with the senior fighters. And old school, you will learn how to fight fast or how to fly. I learned a lot that way. But then a couple of years later, a new gym opened near my house. And that's where I started training seriously. I went to work out with Master Cortese, which was my first instructor. And that's where I started learning Muay Thai, international rule kickboxing, and Savate. And Savate stuck with me because of the complexity of the drills and the finesse of the style. That's how I started and continue to move forward.
So how old were you when you started?
I started Savate when I was 16. Actually.
Okay, so a couple years of karate, and then
it was not karate. It was full. It was really just full contact boxing and some kicking.
Did your parents ever figure out that it was full contact?
Eventually, my mother spoke with my primary physician 1 year later, and the doctor kind of made a face like, that's a tough sport, So my mother questioned it, but at the time the damage was done, and she realized that was not that hard, and we moved forward. Then things got better, From there, I started training in Savate. The gym was a different environment, a different approach. It was more catered toward combat sports. And also it was a gym that my parents joined, so they could see what was going on. And ironically, they always got concerned about my well-being, and to the point that they never made it to one of my fights. Neither my parents never wanted to see me fight for the fear to see me being hit or something.
Mm. Wow. And I'm finding this timing interesting because you said 86, so 88 you're at a combat sports gym, which, granted you're in a rather well populated area at that time, but there was almost none of that going on here in the States then.
Same there. It was hard.
Yeah.
The reason why I actually joined that gym is because my first instructor moved on the other side of town,
Mm.
and I was a kid. I couldn't move, but there was not much availability of this kind of sports. I was kind of lucky to have one
Mm.
in the neighborhood, and then. Give it another 5 years, they started popping up like mushroom. Everybody was doing Muay Thai.
Right.
Jean-Claude Van Damme came out with kickboxer. All of a sudden, everybody had the bands on their arms, and everybody was an expert.
Right. And we all know where that led us. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly it happened, that early 90s between some of the movies and the UFC gaining popularity. I mean, it
Mhm.
was all of a sudden, it was almost a light switch, it seems. And you're in a big area, so you had the most opportunity there. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about Savate because I'm going to guess the majority of the folks watching or listening aren't familiar with it. So most people are going to understand at least a bit about what Muay Thai is. So how might we compare Muay Thai kickboxing with Savate, which to me is a style of kickboxing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main difference is that Savate allows wearing shoes. There are shoes very similar to wrestling shoes, but they're not jagged on the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
so that when you kick, don't get scratched or cut.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually vulcanized, so they're very not soft, but they're very fine. And there are two kinds of shoes. There are the full contact shoes that tend to be reinforced with stitching to make the kick harder,
Mm-hmm.
and the light contact shoes for the assault that tend to constrict the foot a little bit less. But in both scenarios, the shoe allows for a different reach, a different variety of kicks, because now you can use your toes to reach, let's say, under the guard, or point your toes in the stomach, things like that that normally you're not too comfortable doing without shoes. But the biggest thing that does is that makes the sport much more aerobic in the competition, because now, especially in the full contact version, when you kick, you can kick light or commit to that kick, but the shoe is going to carry a lot of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kick light and still obtain a lot of damage, provide a lot of damage, or kick hard and do the same thing. So that makes the dynamic of the sport much more aerobic. So if you see any competitions online, I welcome the guests, to Google Sabah fights. There is plenty nowadays on YouTube. You see the difference where the kicking is much faster than, let's say, Muay Thai, where it tends to be much more static, and you have to commit more on the strikes. I'm not saying that it's better or worse. I'm just saying that it creates a different dynamic in the sport. And it's one of the things that I actually like, because I always train to that high pace of competition, where I'm used to throw five, seven kicks and punches at the same time, to the point that when I fight without shoes, all I have to do is kind of slow down a little bit and match my opponent's rhythm. But I can always pick up the rhythm and force my opponent to gas out when I fight. So that is really the biggest difference. There are a few other differences also in style and movement that make Savate very peculiar. The biggest difference is that we don't tend to fight just linearly, so going into your opponent and back. We focus a lot on moving on angles so that we can maintain the same distance from different angles and force the opponent to move with us. That's really the biggest thing that I try to provide to anybody that comes to my class or whenever I do seminars in other martial arts. That is what I focus on, because without it and without the shoes, it ends up being a form of kickboxing. Like, you chamber your kick slightly differently, but that happens with every style. Those are the two big things that I really try to pass on.
The angle thing, I think, is really important to mention. Most of us who have done any form of martial art have had our instructor at some point telling us, just stop backing up, change angles, move around, don't just back up. And the little bit of training that I've done with you, when we've done kicking combinations, those directional and angle changes were part of the combination. It wasn't change angle, then throw this combination. It was kick, land, change, kick. It was built in with, I would say, much more importance.
Mm-hmm.
It was very fun. It's fundamental in Savate versus other martial arts that I've trained in.
It is, and you can spot people that train a lot in Savate because of that. We focus a lot on that. I push my students and the people that I train and all the other people that I know do the same, enforcing these angles as part of the drill, as part of the movement and the natural approach. Trying to maintain the same angle the same distance from any angle is very important. The other thing is to move with those angles, so what we call the cadrage, which is in an improper translation is framing your opponent, but not in the sense of framing your opponent in a spot where it cannot move. It's more like framing and moving together. So wherever my opponent goes, I adjust my distances and movements to change those angles accordingly. And vice versa, if he tries to do the same thing, it works the other way around. I'm able to get out of a situation more easily than if I would be stable in my guard, static, and trying to find that angle after I combo.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess, I'm not asking you to be the world representative for what Savate is, but I believe you're the first person who's been on that I can really ask these questions. Here we are, 800 and something episodes, and you're the first person, so I'm excited to ask these questions.
Thank you.
Shoes. I'm not aware of another martial art that makes shoes mandatory, might not be the right word, but a part of the training method and a part of the competition. And in fact, it's generally the opposite, right? Where there's protective equipment, and from what you're describing with the shoes, I've been hit with your kicks with your shoes, and I know that they weren't anywhere close to your full power, but it still stings. It hurts in a different way than a barefoot does. So why? Why shoes?
Well, the reason is the history of the sport. Stepping back a little bit, maybe for your audience, Savate historically is associated with sailors that went to the east side of the world and brought back some martial art techniques that they then developed in self-defense style called Chasson, and eventually coded into what's called the boxe française Savate, which is a mix of English boxing and the old Chasson. The old Chasson basically is very similar to it's a style of savate that used to work on boats. So the sailors used to use a lot of ropes, hands on the floor, kind of like a capoeira for
Oh,
balancing.
cool.
And they used to strike with open hand because you wouldn't wear gloves. So for more protections against cuts and things like that, they used to strike open-handed strikes.
Mm.
And eventually was in the late 1800, early 900, it was coded with the English boxing that was becoming very popular at the time, and combined into what became the boxe française savate. Um, and the shoes were part of the um, the style because basically that's what you were wearing when you were going around. When Savate became a self-defense sport, people were going around with shoes, obviously, and with canes. Actually, the cane is the cane and the baton, the long stick, are the only two Savate forms of self-defense. And Savate would be a great sport for a modern pimp because nowadays, it's the only people that I can see going around with a cane. But there was at the time it was very common to carry them around, so it became a form of self-defense.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the shoes stayed with the style, obviously, because they were part of it.
Oh, cool. Okay. And so here now we'll go back. You're 16. You're doing some competition. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously because we haven't said that, but you reside in America now. So at some point you moved,
Mhm.
but I've got a feeling that it wasn't just, oh, you 16 and then you moved to New Hampshire. There's
Oh no,
probably some
I was
some
was a while.
some steps in the middle. So what's the
Yeah.
next mark on your timeline there?
So after I started training in Sabata, then and competing, I did a little bit of, like I said, I did a little bit of everything: Muay Thai, K1. The time was just coming out,
Mm.
and I did also a little bit of shoe boxing, which is the precursor of MMA nowadays. But not much of that. Sabata was my main focus. That's where I wanted to grow. And I started training with different instructors throughout the country, particularly Master Lallo and Manoni, which were in the north part of the country. And this is the funny part of the story. Like that's the 80s, around 89. That's when I started. And we didn't have the internet or the means that we have today to learn things. Like it was a lot of VHS tapes going to somebody, waiting a week, and getting a call, writing down, jogging down directions of what to do, doing another tape. And I wish I could find some of those tapes. I don't know what happened to it, but probably they got thrown away or never returned. But that's how I started learning more about the sport and competing. Eventually, I got my first instructor certificate in 1992, and with my then sparring partner Marco Gilotti, we opened our first school, the École de Combat, which is actually still in Rome, and we also have the branch here in the US, the École de
At
Combat
20,
USA,
you opened a martial arts school at 20.
at 20. Yes,
Wow, that's so cool. What did your parents think about that?
was that?
What did your parents think about that?
It's funny. My mother was always supportive of these kind of things. I was not making a lot of money out of it, and my father was old school. It's like, why are you doing these things? Like, you're not making any money. Like, I'm gonna give you money. Just stop. And to me, it was like, no, I want to do this because it's something that I like. It's self-empowering, and so I continued to do it. And actually, between the two of us, we had a good following. We had several classes throughout the city, and we reached around like 150 students at any given time. So we developed, and I don't want to take the whole credit, but we were among the early instructors that developed the Roman school of Savate. And, it's funny because I met some of the senior officers of the Italian Federation last September, and when they saw me, it's like, "Oh, you guys, it's nice to see you." The old Roman school. Like people still remember that, which is a nice thing to
It's
hear about.
yeah,
But
it's nice to be acknowledged for the work that you put in.
absolutely. But then, at a certain point, I really wanted to compete more. I wanted to complete my um, how would you say? I wanted to get more exposure to fighting, and I wanted to achieve a goal in fighting that eventually led me to take a sabbatical from teaching and focusing more on fighting. And with that, I also ended up going to France for a little while, and I was able to train with one of the legends of this sport, the biggest legend, Richard Silla, which for people that do Savate is, I don't know if Tyson gets close to it, but the man is a legend. He's considered the lion of the sport. He had a total of 137 fights in Savate. In his career, 69 alone in Savate, and lost just once. Overall, he lost some other fights, kickboxing or boxing, but overall, he had an impressive palmarès of wins.
That's an incredible,
It's incredible, yes.
incredible record. I don't think I know anyone else in the modern era that's had that. I mean, you hear stories from 100 years ago. These boxers that would fight 3 times a week, and they be 304 or something like that. But
He was almost undefeated in Sabat. Again, he lost once against Dutch fighter Lucien Cardin. And I'm reading from my notes, but in boxing, he had 33 fights, 28 victories, kickboxing, 28 victories out of 31. So very impressive guy, very knowledgeable, very friendly person. But when I trained with him, I had the opportunity to train at the INSEP of Paris, which is basically what we would consider the Olympic Training Center in Colorado here. I didn't know I was going there. Like I just had a chance to talk with the guy. I was just there.
so how did all this happen? Did you just get on a train and go to France, or did you set some of this up ahead of time?
I set it a little bit ahead. So
Okay.
as part of my study curriculum, I had an opportunity to get scholarships to study in Europe. That was
Hmm.
part of a program that is still going on in Europe to facilitate the travel of students across countries. So I had an opportunity to do 1 year of free study in Portugal because that really appealed me, and just 6 months in Paris. And my first thoughts like, I'm going to Paris, I'm going to train Savat, and that's how I did it. I went there. I got his phone number from my then Italian federation. Called the guy, and I thought he was not going to answer. And he answered the first time. It's like, yeah, I know. Come over, come and train with us. And it's like, okay. And when I got there, I was training with some of the best legends of the sport at the time, like all French champions and people that have done this at a serious level. So that's when I learned a lot about the the drilling, not because I didn't know it before, it just didn't click in my mind. I was doing it, but not as well as them. I remember the first few rounds I did with these people, I was gassing out, trying to touch them. And these people just were moving around, just waiting for their opportunity to counter and never gas out. So I learned a lot there, and was really, really happy to have that opportunity. And after that, I went back to Italy, and
How long were you there?
I was there for 6 months.
That's a long time. You must have gotten a lot better being around so
I
many
got,
people who were so much better.
yeah, I kept calling my friend Marco in Italy. It's like, Marco, I got these drills. Like, we're gonna do this when I come back. And that's what happened. I got back to Rome, and we started training more, competing more, and at the time, I stopped competing around 1998, 1999. At the time, I made it 10th to the WK ranking professionally, and third in their international ranking. And I made it to a good rank in Savate. I became Silver Glove 1, which is for us is the highest level that you can get. So
Okay.
Savate, like karate, has a ranking which we call gloves, and the the yellow glove corresponds roughly to a brown belt. Sorry, the white glove. The yellow glove corresponds to the black belt,
Hmm.
and then you start with the silver gloves, which are the highest ranking. You can go 1, 2, and 3. And at the time, I got my first silver glove from the federation, and then moved to the U.S.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that happened when I started traveling across Europe, I met a bunch of Americans. And at the time, I couldn't speak English because my background was in French. So they spoke Italian and a little bit of grasping words from shows and things. We communicated, and I was very fascinated by a couple of people and the difference in culture that we had, to a point that I decided then, as like, I'm going to the US to have an experience in that country. So I moved here in 2000, and with my wife. She's American, actually. And then we stayed here. At the beginning, we didn't have a plan full to stay permanently here. It was like, let's go and see. We can stay in the US, we can go back to Europe. But then, you settle down, and we like to hear, and the rest is history.
Hmm. Nice. And does she train?
No, my wife.
I always find this fascinating because it for the folks who come on this show, obviously martial arts is such an important part of their life, and people either have said, I need someone who trains, or I need someone who doesn't train because I need that contrast. Does that
Yeah.
describe you?
For me, my wife used to train a little bit when we were in Italy when she was younger, but it was more part of her fitness journey. She was doing spinning, she was doing weightlifting. That class was there too, and she did it, but not really at any interesting level. Then she just parted away. She continued. She's more like a boot camp kind of person. I need to do that class, move out. The movements are simple. I don't have to think too much about it, the strategy and stuff like that. That's kind of. And my kids too don't train. It took me a while actually to get used to it because it kind of bothered me a little bit at the beginning.
Mm.
But it is life. You cannot expect everybody to follow your path. And actually, Bill Wallace was very supportive of that. One time we were talking about it during one of the symposiums. It's like, they're going to find what they love. And they are. Like, my daughter does synchronized swimming, my son does competitive swimming, and
There you go.
they're good with that.
They've got something. They're doing something with some discipline,
Absolutely.
something that's taking some hard work. I think that's the most important part. Yeah. Okay. And given that you're part of this culture, this Savate culture that you created in Italy, and you immersed yourself in France, and then back to Italy, and I would imagine after you came back, your teaching, your school kept growing,
Mhm.
and then you choose to leave that and come here, where I'm going to guess 1 in 100 martial artists have even heard today of Savate. That must have been difficult for you. This discipline that is so important to you.
It was different. It definitely was different because I was used to the structure that the organization has in Europe versus what we have here in the US. Also, one of the other differences is that when you talk about Europe, every state, every country has its own organization, and the main part of Western Europe, they're very organized. When you come to the US, because it's a country, you think, okay, you go there and there is an organization. But then when you land here, you realize, well, there is many states. It's kind of like talking about the whole Europe versus talking about the individual countries. And so in the US, we had definitely a smaller reach, but overall also different level of organizations set up in different states. So when I moved to the US in 2000, the area around New York had a few schools. New Jersey had a federation. Maryland had a federation. Nowadays, those two states don't have official federations. They have representatives, but not official federations. We also changed the structure a little bit, functioning more as an umbrella versus having the same thing that we were trying to copy from Europe. Every location has its own branch that has to build everything from scratch.
Were you well received by those practitioners when you came?
I was well received, but nobody. Let me rephrase it because I don't want to sound like that people were negative. Everybody was focusing on their little space where they had to develop the sport. And also, again, you come to the US, it's a different attitude. There is more of an emphasis of creating a following for your school than a larger organization that oversees everything. And that has always been a challenge that we had in the US. We grew from 2000 to probably 2015. We continued to grow, but then we went down and then we're coming back up. There is always this waving effect with the organization that prevents us to be a full-grown organization like we have in Europe or Canada to an extent, even if they're not much bigger than us and other organizations. We have developed different approaches also in the US that are possibly better than other countries because of the vastity of the country that we live in. Online training now became a more predominant approach. So there are a couple of options that people can follow for that versus finding a school in Alaska, which you're not going to find, but at least you can train in a sport that you might like.
I've heard from a number of people who have spent significant time training both in Europe and the United States about how different it is. Just that and specifically people who train seminars, that they teach seminars, that when they go to Europe, they are just welcomed and people just, they're much more open, whereas here in the United States, kind of what you're talking about, that people are a little more reserved. Some people, they want to carve out their own space and they don't want to let anybody else into it. And that's much more common here than it is there.
It is, I would agree on that. It's just a different attitude, a different practice. I don't want to say it's better or worse. It's just the way it is. We are raised in Europe and in the part of the world to grow within organizations and have opportunities to compete within those organizations. The counter is that financially there is not much of an opportunity there to make the money that you could make here in a competition. So, or even teaching seminars, so that's the biggest counter. Another thing that I really noticed coming to the US is how American fighters tend to be more comfortable with fighting. And I'll elaborate on that.
Yeah, please.
Basically, you know, when I was training people in Europe, I almost had to beg them to compete. You know, you as an instructor train a student, and you know that they can do that competition. But those students, and maybe it was me, some of those students are like, I don't feel I'm ready. Maybe we wait another couple of months and we do one, next time. While here, just like, it has always been my experience when I train somebody, it's like, hey, you're ready. And it's like, okay, I'm ready. Just no questioning, and at the same time, also, I had opportunities to train good fighters that just didn't need too much coaching on the mental side. Like, they just were ready for it. And that was always something that shocked me a little bit.
Hmm. Right on. And when you talk about training fighters, is this specifically for Savate, or are you training them for other things?
So here in the US, my main focus has always been training other sports with Savate drills.
Mm.
But I had opportunities also to train students for competitions here. The challenge with Savate is that we are not that developed nationally, so there is not a lot of opportunity to compete here. One good thing for me is that because I'm in New Hampshire and close to Quebec, I have the opportunity to go there and compete and bring my students to compete locally there. It's 4 hours drive. It's considered an international fight, but it wouldn't be different than going to New York. It's just an opportunity to compete, and I was fortunate with that. It just happened to be that way because I was located in New Hampshire. The closest gym for the longest time was in Maryland, and it's still there with Steve Savoy teaching locally. But there are not a lot of competitors that can challenge your students to get at a good level for an international competition. So going to Quebec provided some of that opportunities, those opportunities. And in 2008, I took some of my students in a world championship in Paris. Actually, one of the largest group of Americans that we brought to an international competition was that year. We had representatives from many states, and some were from New Hampshire too. And one of them, actually, Peggy Morgan, which ended up going to train for one of the UFC Ultimate Fighters, the first actually female edition, had a good run at UFC for a while too.
Nice. Okay. And I hope it's okay that I
Yeah.
say this. You recently had a significant birthday, and Terry was telling me that you wanted to celebrate that birthday in a certain way, and he was blown away at how that went. And I don't. Is it okay that we talk about
Well,
this?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, so I turned 50 last December, and joking with my students and with Terry, is like, oh man, because let me step back. We always have sparring on Saturday, and between sparring with Terry and my students, I always do between 25 and 30 rounds of sparring with everybody. Assuming, that not every round is a full speed, but I still put a good training, which I like because it forces me to train on a
Yeah.
Saturday. But joking about it, it's like we start talking about my birthday, and we said, well, maybe we do 50 rounds, and then just became one thing. So it was, I don't remember, it was like 2 days before I went to Italy because I was going to celebrate with my parents and relatives also in Italy for this big milestone. So we had this event, and a lot of people showed up from nowhere. So, I thought it was going to be just with my students. Really, we have people just that stop by. Oh, I heard that we were going to do this thing. Give me a pair of gloves. And it was nice. It was almost 2.5 hours of sparring, and I sparred with kids, and I sparred with senior fighters, but the majority was with people that I was happy to exchange combos with, So I really enjoyed it.
And without, I'm not going to try to quote what I was told, but uh, it sounded like it went well. It sounded like you can still hang at a fairly high level
Thank you, thank you. Yes, it went well. I was tired at the end, and I'm
for
looking
two and a
for
half. I
six.
don't know who wouldn't be.
Yeah, it's how do you say? It was it was a long amount of time,
Yeah.
but at the end, one of the things I learned in this sport is to pace yourself and commit to certain combos and strikes. So one of the drills that we do a lot in class is a live light sparring,
Mhm.
that goes on for especially Saturday, goes on for an hour and a half, and people spar for roughly 20 rounds. But the key is not going hard. We can always do that, is controlling, working on your technique, the things that you want to drill, that you can do when somebody is not challenging with a strong punch or kick. So, for example, if you're not good at bobbing and weaving, and you want to try that, you're not going to try it with somebody that is trying to take your head off.
Right.
But if everybody has the same mindset, you're going to start trying those things that you normally don't do because of fear of being hit, and that forces your capability to adapt to the movements,
Mhm.
and also committing to certain strikes versus other strikes. One of the things that I push a lot is that you don't have to um, kick hard every time, particularly if I see, for example, that you're parrying that kick. I waste less energy by throwing that kick light and going back into my guard and do something else or move away, then commit to that kick anyway, or worse, stop in midair. It's like, oh, it's not going to go in, and creating an opportunity for you to counter whenever you get the way I behave. So students tend to adjust to that and tend to play with that opportunity to combo things hard and light at the same time, and save energy. And that's how I do it, because again, that's whenever I'm pressed, I will kick and punch hard. Whenever I'm not pressed, or whenever I don't find that opening that will connect, I will just go light, and that saves a lot of energy throughout the whole time.
Makes sense. Now you've mentioned a couple people. We've talked about Terry Dow, who is a fantastic martial artist. You've mentioned Bill Wallace, who's been on the show, fantastic martial artist, and folks can likely assume from that you've been around plenty of other fantastic martial artists. I know you have. And generally, when we're around other people who are really good at things, it changes who we are and how we do things. If we were to watch you train or spar today versus, say, 20, 25 years ago, what would we notice that's different?
The Definitely the drilling, the movement, until I went to France, and until I met Richard Silla, but also Francois Penacchio a few years later, which is another champion of the sport. Is His nickname was the Star of the Savate at the time, L'Etoile de la Savate, because of his style. And Francois Penacchio, for those that don't know him on the channel, one of his biggest fights was against Ramon Decker in 1998, 1999. Very big fight at the time. It was the clash of the styles. Ramon Decker coming with a more traditional Muay Thai style at the end of his career, starting with a Dutch style, but then toward the end it was definitely much more traditional. Versus Francois Penacchio being a more Sabat-driven kickboxer. and the fight, was amazing. You can find it on YouTube. And, if you check Decker versus Pinocchio, there are many uploads of that
Mm.
fight. But ultimately, Francois ended up winning the fight because of his drilling and movements and power too. But the biggest thing was that he didn't go into a fight against Ramon Decker trying to match Ramon Decker's style. He worked around that, and that to me is what made the difference for the fight. Ramon Decker was a very hard person to hit and a very hard person to take down. So if you went into that fight hoping for a knockout and a glorious fast ending, chances were that you wouldn't have achieved that easily. Um, Francois won on the long term on points and did a great job. And to me, Francois was the one that drove me more to understand how to change angles to avoid being hit and countering, which is one of the fundamentals of the sport. As you progress in your ranking, you start with the basics, hitting and then hitting without being countered. And as you progress farther up, the techniques don't get much more complex than the basics. But the complexity of the drills come from the capability of hitting without being hit, or setting your opponent to be hit without being hit. And that just keeps drilling that mentality of avoiding being hurt while hurting your opponent. And that was something that Francois Penacchio told me one time in a seminar, and it just stuck with me. He said, you don't want to spend the money that you make with a competition or two into medicines and therapy to fix something. You want to get to the end of your career being able to walk. And that kind of drove my teaching after. I always focus on that, avoiding being hit and countering at the same time.
Makes sense. You've had a chance to, again, train not just with wonderful,
Yeah.
high caliber martial artists, but a lot of what I would call everyday martial artists, folks like me who, they've been training a long time, but, we're not world class, we're not champions.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And a lot of those people are coming out of what we might call more common martial arts, karate, taekwondo. And you've sparred a lot of them, and you've probably noticed some patterns.
Yes.
What advice might you give to folks from your perspective that might improve their sparring?
Yeah. So it's hard because depending who you are talking with, like and how they're training. If they are so into the martial art that in a way that they don't see outside of it, it's hard to have them learn tricks that can help them
Mm-hmm.
because they will just how do you say, dismiss them ultimately. You know, many times I spar with people that do traditional karate and might not do competitive karate enough to have that mobility that they need to have to be in the ring with me. And they just end up trying to come in with a one kick, one punch, but they might absorb 30 seconds of hitting just to get in with that punch, so it just doesn't work in that context. Might work in a different situation, like of a self-defense, where you don't have somebody that is trying to apply a combat sport practice with you, or versus somebody that is self-defending against somebody that attacks you. We have a different dynamic, and that's the biggest challenge I see, that people try to use those skills just one way fits them all versus adapting to my style. I hope that answers the question a
Yeah,
little bit.
it does and it doesn't. Um, let me ask it a little bit differently. If you could give your typical, your average karateka taekwondo practitioner one drill to work on, one drill for that you could assign them and say, do this a bunch, what would that be?
That to me will be changing angles and
Okay.
at the same time hitting without being hit. You know,
Okay.
so to,
How keep going. Say more about that.
so to change angles, you gotta start focusing again, not going into a specific attack, but taking that attack from a different angle. So let's think about how we move on the tatami or on the ring in a circular way versus linear way. So, for example, I don't like to talk about side stepping when you do a side exiting, because to me that brings you into a geometry of triangles. So my distance changes when I take a side step. But if instead I do a step on a circle, I always maintain the same ray from every angle. So that's the biggest thing. Try to move around a circle instead of moving sideways, backward, and forward. And attacking your opponent, not necessarily by going forward, but by going on a different angle on the circle. That is the biggest thing that people,
And you're talking about a circle around your opponent.
around your opponent. So thank you for the clarification. Your opponent is the center of the circle, and you move that with that opponent. Now, with that, though, comes more exposure to, and that's why you need to be able to be in and out from that circle at the same time to avoid being hit, and be capable to hit at the same time. And the biggest difference that I see usually in traditional martial arts, or even sometimes in kickboxing and boxing, is that when people try to avoid being hit, they take a step back, and that step back might be 2 feet. Well, it's good. I'm away from you and I'm protected, but I'm also away from you to attack you, because now it takes more energy to cover an attack or to close that distance with 1 or 2 steps. While instead, if I move on a circle and I move away from your attacking guard on that circle, I'm always protected because you have to follow me. So if you think about a regular guard, if I move outside of your guard, the only thing you can do is spin on that side to counter, unless you want to rotate with me. But when you rotate with me, you're following my drill. All I have to worry about is your back rotation, So that is one of the things that people can work on. And maintaining the ray as always that opportunity for you to move on the side, one way or another, one to attack or defend.
Got it. Good stuff.
You need to try it more than think about it. That's the challenge, By having people doing things one way, you need to put them in a class, a seminar, and work on that for a little bit, and hope that they take it home and try it. I mean, way to do it is, have your opponent stand in the ring and work around it, or you do it a lot on the bag. But the bag can be deceiving, because your distances tend to change a little bit. So it definitely needs to be complemented by something else.
Got it. If people want to see more of this stuff, if they want to connect with you, follow you on social media, maybe, uh, you know, online training, right? You mentioned that. Just how would they connect with you?
Absolutely. So people can find me online on Facebook at Gino Nessuno, or even Instagram, same name. They can reach out to me via email at info.edec, for Recall the Combat, EDECUSA at Gmail. And I'm sure we can share that
Yeah.
information after.
Yeah, we'll link all
And
that stuff.
they can reach to me also through the US Federation at ussavate.org. The federation can get in touch with me in the area, and that's the main way I connect with people that want to work with me. For online training, I don't have an online training program. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not me. I like to
It's
train
okay.
people face to face, and I'm a point in my life, actually, for full disclaimer for your audience, I'm a point in my life that I don't train everybody. I train those people that want to be trained at a serious level, because my time and your time is valuable. I have a family, like other people have families. So if they really want to be trained, I will train them, and we'll work them to get to a point where they can continue their journey independently, and move on. But I don't have much time for beginners. It's-
I understand.
for that, I actually suggest going to Savate USA. It is an online or Savate teachable. I can share that information with
Yeah,
you
please.
for the group. Nicolas Signac, which is a Frenchman that lives in California and is my counterpart. Actually, I think is the only other person on my rank of internationally recognized in this country, that has an awesome online course, and he's really good in teaching people across the country and develop these skills from a beginning level
Oh, cool.
to an experience level two. He had a very good fighters too. But he has put together actually this course a couple of years back, and people are taking advantage of it.
Awesome. Awesome. And yeah, to the audience, we're definitely going to link all that stuff up in the show notes. Head over to whistlekickmartialartsradio.com for the full experience of that. Check out our stuff at whistlekick.com. And Gino, thanks for being here. But I want you to end. So, what are your words that you want to leave the audience with today?
Again, for me is follow your journey, train into the martial art that you love, but also be open to other martial arts. I learned a lot, for example, from taekwondo and karate on things that I could do slightly differently, and provide me an edge against my opponents. And I learned a lot from other martial arts on things that I shouldn't do just because they don't work. You build your style, and as long as you're truthful to that, you're going to be successful.